Okay, welcome back to the AEC Hive podcast, where we're talking about innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction. I'm Ralph Montague, director at ArcDocs and co-founder of the AEC Hive. I'm joined by John Egan, my fellow co-founder. John, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi everyone, John Egan. I'm CEO at BIM Launcher and co-founder at AEC Hive. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
We're really excited today. We're in Dallas, Texas, joined by innovator, CEO, co-founder Clifton Harness from TestFit. Clifton, it's great to have you on board and looking forward to talk to you. Do you want to give everybody just a brief background about yourself, where you came from, how you got into your business, etc.?
I'm not a morning person, and I'm on my first cup of coffee, so if I'm a little rusty today, give me some grace. So yeah, I'm Clifton Harness, co-founder TestFit. We are changing how buildings are initially looked at in the feasibility stage of building design, and we do that by writing very robust algorithms that solve simple automation problems for architects. It's stuff like the allocation and counting of parking spaces. It's amazing to me that we're still counting things manually in this industry. We work on features for drawing more efficiently in the computer, roads and apartment buildings and office buildings. And we're really trying to affect change on commodity architecture from the process side of things, as opposed to, here's a better, more beautiful building. That's not really the problem anymore, I don't think. The problem in architecture is process. And how do you speed it up?
I mean, you have an interesting background because you were in the real estate sector and, then went on to do architecture. It's an interesting problem. Like, if you think of the interaction between architects and real estate developers, the developers are looking for quick answers on, what can happen on the site, what can get on the site, whereas the architects want to spend months coming up with beautiful designs. And is that where you're sitting in between, trying to get to the quick answers that will
sort
of establish the value of a property? Or
commodity buildings, yeah. I mean, my background is weird, I think, in a sense. My dad's a real estate developer. I grew up around real estate development, and I decided to go get an architecture degree. And I fell in love with architecture, and I believe, fervently that buildings should be strategic, systemic, sustainable, beautiful, experiential, meaningful, contextual. Buildings have to do a lot of things, right? And when I got into the real estate development world, the building is only one of 5 different levers that developers have when they're putting deals together. And my job was to draw site plans again and again and again, just to try to get all 5 of these levers, stable at a point in time where you've got the building design statics. That's your first lever. The second one's your construction costs. The third one's your deal, the deal structure between your LPs and your bank, and who's got what interest rates. And the fourth piece being the actual land seller who's actually going to sell this thing. And then, of course, the fifth and most troublesome piece is, or the hardest piece for private real estate development, is how you interface with the city. So, those 5 levers are constantly being squeezed in order for buildings to get, out of feasibility and into production. And honestly, like, if I was going to spend 20 years of my life counting parking spaces, it wouldn't have been, a very useful use of my time here in the AEC industry.
To a lot of architects, when you talk about algorithms and automating things, you immediately see a big portion of the sector's backs go up, and as if you can't automate architecture, and you can't.
in a sense, you can though, right?
Yeah.
So architects they're creating algorithms all day, every day, whether or not they know it. I mean, all an algorithm is a list of steps that you follow. So for example, trying to get a plan onto a piece of paper, it sounds like a pretty simple problem. Well, what size of paper? So, okay, if I'm an architect and I know that it's a presentation, I'm going to start with an 11 by 17. And then I'm going to work myself back. And I'm working myself back into an algorithm, right? So what's the scale that I need to display? Okay, it's a 1/4 inch. And so you measure how big that actually is on the piece of paper, at scale. Okay, and then how do I fit it? And if you follow your list of instructions to a T every single time you lay out a new deal, you essentially are creating an algorithm. And what we have not done in architecture is capture that intelligence that goes into all of these little tasks that we do. And that's, you kind of present a product to the industry and you run around selling it. And the essence of what we're selling is essentially captured intelligence that can just be reused again and again and again. And Revit's no different. Like, instead of drawing the wall with 2 lines of a specified dimension, you draw a center line and you can just change the wall width basically later by specifying, what thickness it has, and it updates in real time. It's no different than an algorithm. My point is that architects, you're interacting with algorithms all day, every day, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I suppose you're capturing what people probably have in their heads, and unfortunately, if somebody left a company, they'd leave with that information in their head. But you're taking sort of those steps and useful knowledge out of their heads and into a program that could basically go through those steps a lot quicker than maybe a human being might do in terms of drawing a car park and counting the layout. Yeah, so it's an interesting intersection I think you've found as TestFit, where you're taking these problems, which are particularly in the early stage of projects, where you're trying several different schemes, as you say, to get the right get the numbers to work, if you like, and a lot of that can be quite time consuming just to try these different options and recalculate the numbers and try another option, recalculate the numbers, often with the promise of maybe getting a job in the future to develop that building up. I think a lot of architects are doing that sort of feasibility work almost for nothing as the promise of getting a job. Not all of them, but a lot of, I would imagine a lot of them are.
So we sell our software to both architects and real estate developers, and if you ask the architects, they often will say, "Oh, of course we get paid for all the feasibility work that we do." And then you ask the developers, and they say, "Well, we've never had to pay for feasibility studies before." So when I was a young kind of startup CEO walking around trying to get feedback, I heard that information and I was like, "Oh, there's a nasty secret in here that nobody wants to say anything about." How incentives really aren't aligned in the feasibility stage, where they're both kind of lying to each other and speaking past each other. It's kind of not productive. We have a housing crisis and we're all working against each other in AEC.
It is crazy. And how did you get from this idea to starting a business?
Not much of a process. I think people think, oh, they probably sat in a room and created a perfect pitch deck and, went out and sold it to somebody, and then they built the product. That's the typical startup mentality. That's not really what we do at TestFit. So my co-founder, he got laid off back in 2016 from a mobile game studio, and him and I had kind of been working on this project to help me solve problems in my job. I need software to help me solve this because I don't want to I don't want to keep counting parking stalls. So can you help me solve this? And he ended up leaving this job, and he called me and said, I actually remember where I was sitting when he called me. I was at a taco diner in Dallas. It's hilarious, but I think I'm gonna work on this idea. It could turn into something, while I'm searching for a job. And I think Ryan was just enthralled with the complexity of the problem. Building design is not simple, and he's just an engineer that's brilliant and creative, and I gave him a pretty hard problem to solve, and he came through with a minimum viable product. And, I kind of asked him, so when were you going to interview for other jobs? Aren't you looking for gainful employment? And he's like, No, like I think we could continue to do this, and so then I had to go talk to my wife and my employer and figure out my exit from that company, and so I could help him build this thing. So yeah, that was kind of 2017, and then we released our initial build. It was terrible. I can't believe people bought this thing in 2017, and then we just grew a small business for 2 years, and it was making some money, and I was making more money selling my software than I was working in architecture, and that's without VC investment. I mean, my encouragement to the innovators out there is like, you can make a lot of money innovating this industry. Like, if you leave, make product, make service, you can make a lot of money doing it. Got venture funding in early 2020, and then the COVID thing, and it happened. Still is happening at the time of this recording. So we've created a decentralized company. We're hiring the best people that we can find, not the best people in Dallas. For the AEC technologists out there, like, Dallas is not the ground zero for AEC innovation. I mean, there's San Francisco, Boston, London. There's other cities that are much more poised for disruption. But Dallas is the spiritual homeland of modern real estate development in the United States. This is where Trammell Crow is based. This is where all the people that follow his methodology of creating value with buildings, a lot of them are here. So while it might not make sense from a software engineering standpoint, our clients are here. So,
and what would you say is, because I think I've heard you speak about this before, but the difference, like, you're talking about algorithms, and there's a lot of talk about generative design and computational design, and I mean, a lot of people seem to be putting effort into that, but there's questions. Even last year, there were a lot of questions as to how useful that is. Like, what's the difference between what you're doing and generative design or computational design, or is there a difference, or is that what you're doing?
It is what we're doing in a sense. The academic definition of generative design is requesting a computer system to run through goals and constraints with a problem. And where I think generative design has completely failed, like by Autodesk, by SpaceMaker, by any of these people out there, is you haven't built a constraint environment. You throw a 3-box generator together and you ask it to optimize for views. And when I look at it, they're optimizing for something. But, the thing that happens when you make a really, really tall building is that your core gets bigger. You start to need more staircases. Like, you start to have more elevators. So there are constraint environments out there, but they're limited to one person's ability to write a very large, either Grasshopper or Dynamo script. It's not very extendable. Firms don't get a whole lot of reuse out of creating these constraint environments within those Python modeling environments. And so all of that is to say, like, in the long run of building out TestFit, we're building a constraint environment. And all we do is we generate one static design from the user's inputs, and that's the level of innovation that we're bringing to the industry right now, is just generating one good design option
rather than 50 or 100 or...
Well, rather than 10 billion, like 10 billion, like, look, like, these are people with jobs, and like, we want to actually get something useful out of TestFit. So I don't think I've ever seen somebody throw something into refinery and you get like a normal apartment building out of it. Like, the things that we need to optimize are normal, typical commodity buildings on this planet. And it seems like we're left with only the Norman Fosters of the world really optimizing, the shape of form. So, democratizing these tools is the name of the game, and we're doing that.
I suppose that's another thing, just pick up on democratizing. As soon as people hear that, you sort of imagine the price of something coming down. And like as things get democratized, that tends to be what happens. The price gets lower anyway. But obviously you're reaching a much broader market. We had a previous conversation on the podcast, and we were talking about just how little of the built environment is actually touched by architects. It's a very low percentage. There's a lot of building going on or happening, or even being renovated, changed, etc. That's not involving architects, mainly because maybe a lot of people see architecture as a kind of elitist service. And,
It absolutely is, though. I mean,
yeah.
The people that can afford to pay for the services of the architect are the people that can pay to build the most expensive structures that mankind has ever, come up with. Yeah. Like buildings are not cheap. A 300 unit apartment building, which is like roughly the size of the ideal real estate deal, those are 30, 40, 50 million dollars. Like people that can afford to hire an architect, these are people that managing lots of money, moving money around, investing vast sums of money. It's a very elitist industry, and people that endeavor to bring architecture to the least of these, like 100 Fold Studios, a firm out in Montana that tries to basically democratize design by giving it away for free. Those are the real winners, I think, in the architecture community, like people that are really pushing what architecture can do for all mankind. And I'm really interested in that part of our business. I feel like Architecture for Humanity is a really great organization. It's pretty inspiring, and I would love to get involved more in organizations like that. But at the same time, like, we have housing problems, we have all kinds of problems. I'm sure while it is an elitist sort of community of people that tap into architects still can go out and find their own real estate deals. Like, we can still enact lots of change on the industry by ourselves. I just feel like we lack a little bit of confidence to do it.
It's almost like open sourcing architecture. I know John is a great proponent of open sourcing things. I suppose whenever we start talking about democratizing services or products and open sourcing, the question always comes to me, like, how do people make a living then? Because you still have to make a living out of that.
Yeah, the free to use and free to play world is like ad driven, right? So there's really not volume in the AEC world for you to have free to use. I don't know if it's in the cards, right? TestFit's very niche software. Like, it would be very hard to build something as powerful and credible as TestFit at night and on the weekends. The purpose of building a software company is to build and maintain software. And when I say maintain software, I mean like iron out bugs, just keep the code functioning. Software is not you build the hammer and you ship it, and the hammer, is going to stay stable. There's some things in the hammer that we haven't found out about yet. With open source software, you get what you pay for, which is oftentimes developers that lose interest in the process, or the thing is, like, firms that build their own software, they have to understand that you're not only endeavoring to build the software, but you're also endeavoring to maintain that code base from now until the end of time. So there's an ongoing cost when you decide to develop your own software.
And you're committed to servicing your customers and keeping them happy. And John, maybe bring you in, and because I know you have some strong ideas about open sourcing. And
for me, open source is just a tool that is used by a business, the same as any other tool. For me, when I consider open sourcing, I am looking at the adaptability of that software, and how I like to think about it is the speed of getting past that initial stage where users can adopt your software because the barriers are lower, and they can also give you that feedback faster to tell you whether you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong. So it really fast forwards that entire process. One thing that I would encourage anyone that's listening that is thinking about open source and open source business is this concept of an open core software, is where business would have the core open source, but they would provide that the crust, if you like, of that as an enterprise offering of that software. So if you look at, for example, a well-known software in our industry, and someone we had on last week's podcast, and someone you know pretty well, Clifton, you might tell us about your relationship later with, is Hyper. So they have an open core business model. They have an open source software. Yes, you can take it, you can run it yourself, you can extend it, you can adopt it, you can look at all the security, not the security, but you could look at the vulnerabilities of the software, etc. You can take that, you can run it on your own servers. But to operate that software and to run it or to deploy it, you need to have the in-house expertise. And that's where the gap is in most AEC companies. So you've architecture firms, engineering firms, construction firms, all able to pick up this software. They're able to use the software so that it's functional. It shows off what the software can do. But when you want to use that software on a live project, you don't want it running on your structural engineer's computer where he doesn't know how to make a sustainable service out of that piece of software. You want to actually go to the source, i.e. in this case Hyper, and ask them to run it for you. And that's where they come in with their service. I think that the word democratization is, I don't really understand that. I think that yes, a software, it can be commoditized, but democratized is, I don't know, it's a bit subjective how you interpret that word. And
it's not that bad. I mean, here's one example. Company recently got acquired by another large company. In order to access their suite of tools, you had to pay anywhere between $10,000 and $30,000 to look at one site with one building on it. So that doesn't, in my mind, that's the opposite of democratization. People can't afford to use that. That's insane. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is democratizing the code base so that other people can use the code base. I'm not talking about that. In architecture, you have 50% of firms that haven't even started using BIM yet. So there's a community in the AEC world that is very innovative, bleeding edge, very far ahead. And, that's Hyper. They're 2 or 3 years ahead, I think, in terms of the vision. But what I'm disrupting at TestFit is people using CAD, people still in 2D workflows, people still on trace paper. I think people have failed to realize that we haven't even innovated that yet. So, we can have a discussion about what the world will look like in 10 years and how important open sourcing software will be for the future businesses that have to compete with other businesses that are building their own proprietary Hyper frameworks. I mean, if I was an architecture firm right now, today, probably what I'd do is hire an engineer and get developing, on some kind of platform. Most firms are not there yet, John. They're just not. They're not even thinking about capturing their intelligence and deploying it. They're thinking, how do I win the next deal to get, a $400,000 CD set fee?
So I can get people to sit down and draw out parking stalls and count them manually.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, my relationship with Ian's great. I want them to succeed. They want us to succeed. We don't. There's not enough innovation in this industry for us to not support one another. But the typical small firm, they're not going to have a Hyper developer on their team. That's where having, being able to buy a license at TestFit is super simple.
So, would you agree that TestFit is essentially a custom developed solution for businesses to like Orwell architecture engineering firms? It's just out of the box. It's ready to go specific.
Yeah, it's the first desktop purpose-built generative design tool for buildings. I mean, it's the first one, and been building this thing for 3.5 years. Real life people use TestFit. We generated around 40,000 apartment buildings last year within the application. You know, we're having vast impact on high density multifamily innovation, which is very niche, right? So how do we take this bit of innovation that we've already been able to accomplish, apply it to more building types, apply it to broader industry? That's really my mission right now. It's not how do I unseat Revit, or, you know, how do we recreate BIM in a new, you know, I think everybody's kind of looking for what's after BIM.
That's too big.
Not really our mission. You know, we're just trying to get architects to stop counting parking stalls.
So would you say that's part of your success, is that you focus on a very specific problem? You know, like you didn't sort of set out to change the world. Like you identified, because of your own work, a very specific problem, and you set out to conquer that, and now you're sort of taking that to the next level. So you went from parking stalls to apartment layouts to office layouts, and you're sort of growing it incrementally.
So you know, the advice I gave John a long time ago still rings true, I think, right? Which is you find one customer and you build a product for them and you listen to them and they tell you what they want changed. We're no different today. Like, if I could say, like, the one functioning part of our startup that I know works really well is this amount of feedback that we're getting, you know, at the top of the funnel, this loop, the feedback loop that we have with our customers. But there's so many different requests for so many different, you know, reasons, and track hundreds of these things in Trello, and eventually you kind of come up with a consensus of like what your customer base wants as the next sort of feature that you build. So that's how we've approached TestFit, is that method. Whereas I think other startups, they kind of plan out, you know, maybe a whole framework that they have to build, and then they build that, and then they go to market. We were a little bit different.
Did you say you spent enough time in the industry as an architect to really experience the frustration? I mean, is that helping you as well? Like, what it sounds like is the start of your product anyway came from a genuine frustration that was plaguing you and potentially everyone like you in the industry. And as you've worked with different customers now, I think you've probably, because you're working with customers, getting a much more broader view than you did when you were an architect of some of the frustrations and things that are going on. Like, what are the big things at the moment that are, you know, you see in the industry that are frustrating you and your customers and like to solve?
I think the main frustration right now is the tech stack is antiquated. Most firms are using. So, like, you know, we built TestFit to be very fast, and you can go through 10,000 different designs, you know, like in 5 minutes. And it's a really great user experience. Like, it's keeping up with the architect's brain, like what's in their head. Finally, something that can keep up.
Which tech stack are you talking about?
I'd say I'm just traditional BIM. It's slow. It's big. It's heavy. It takes forever. You know, you draw a wall and you have to wait 10 seconds for it to get drawn. Like, it's very bad latency. My first experience in modern BIM was terrible. Yeah, it was to place plastic wall guards on about 500,000 square feet, 50,000 square meter hospital building. You know, and you'd place the wall guard and then you'd wait 10 minutes for the whole thing to regenerate. And then, you know, so I think people are frustrated with, like, it's sluggish and it's time to be quicker. And so, you know, people working in TestFit, they love it because it's very fast. It's very responsive. So that I think is one of the core frustrations with BIM. It's not that it doesn't do everything. It almost does do everything. It's just that it's slow. So if you can get the speed and the feature set, I think people will be very happy.
Are you following anyone who's sort of working on that problem, or do you see anything these people are taking the next step? I mean, the likes of Hyper, but others maybe.
Yeah, no, I think HighPower is definitely, like, in terms of people that are innovating BIM itself, HighPower is probably the company to watch. Of course, they understand the problem at a very intimate level. The AEC toolkit they've got, right? So if I, thinking of future workflows and TestFit, I can generate my feasibility study, push it into HighPower to get the BIM model, and then, you're not even touching an Autodesk ecosystem, right? So the future is very bright, right, for these tools to work together, I think. But BIM in the traditional sense, it's too heavy. It's not editable from a high level. It's, if I want to move a whole wing of a building, it's not 3 clicks. It's like significant more work. So yeah, that's where my head's at in terms of innovation. That's
and
what I think.
Is that the way TestFit are thinking as well? Because we've had other conversations on the podcast where people are saying, the traditional approach to software in AEC was try and put all the functions into cram all the functions into one desktop application. It becomes this massive behemoth thing. But, like when you look at other things, people are splitting it up. So like if you look at your phone, everything's an app, and the app only does one thing, but that app talks to another app, and the sort of connected ecosystem of apps, if you like. I mean,
yeah.
Is that the way you think? Like TestFit is an app that eventually would plug into?
Yep. It's plugging into a broader API ecosystem. What I mean by that is with an API, you could ship data. Like we're already using one with Thornton Tomasetti. They're structural engineer. They have some pretty amazing API based technology that they use internally. And we were able to convince them to give us access to a column sizing API. And so within TestFit, all we do is we generate a model, we take an analytical model, we send it to Thornton Tomasetti, and they send us back structural columns. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the future, is coordination meetings, just via API using some kind of AI. I try to make a big deal about it, but I don't think people know what they're looking at when they see that, right? It's a little bit wild and hard to understand, but that's the future, is these API connections between now all of a sudden you can work with services firms that are actually maintaining software. Like there's other firms out there that are building really great technology, and we've spun up some conversations with them to see if they'd want to include their intelligence into the TestFit configurator.
That's fascinating, because
it's
just as you mentioned those columns. So you, like previously, the engineer would go for 2 weeks, do some calculations, draw something up, come back at the next meeting. These are the column sizes, and that's screwed up your whole parking layout.
Exactly, right.
Then it's another 2 weeks for the architect to go in to reconfigure the parking layout to work with the columns, and so 4 weeks down the line, and what you've just described there, presumably that's hours or days or something rather than weeks and months.
Right, and it's totally unnecessary too. Like the consultant one has built this whole thing on trace paper, and they scan it in and send it via PDF to consultant 2. They recreate the whole damn thing in CAD, and then they do their sizing, and then consultant 3 might be able to, or might only know how to do the specific task in Revit. So they're going to recreate the whole thing in Revit to do, duct layouts or something. So there is not a interoperable sort of ecosystem out there that takes into account this mixed media approach that our industry has. Which is why it's so hard to innovate PDFs. I mean, they're just reliable.
Just in terms of giving some advice to the AEC Hive community of innovators. So, I think it's quite clear from what you're saying, there's a desperate need for people to innovate in this sector. We need more innovators, I think you mentioned there. But I suppose a lot of people would be listening and thinking, well, I have this idea, but it sounds like such a simple idea. And I think the other thing that's come across really strongly from your message is it sounds like a simple idea, but it's actually a very complex problem. And the fact that you've brought a solution to the market to solve that problem, you call it a niche problem, but it's probably a problem that's occurring all across the world in every architectural office to some degree.
Yeah.
So it's probably less niche than you imagine.
Well, I think I called TestFit niche because not every firm, like if you're using Revit as your documentation tool, you're going to have 15, licenses to that. Like, right, it's going to be very important to your firm. But TestFit is, maybe a single license, maybe 2 licenses, maybe 3 if it's a pretty big shop. But the group of people in firms doing feasibility is small compared to people doing documentation. So it's not massive volume, but this is how I think we get in with firms, right? We start with feasibility. And if the feedback leads us into SDs, then we're going to start doing things that you would see in SDs. And if it gets, hey, it'd be handy if we actually didn't have to build the whole BIM model, can we just do it in here? Like points in time, we're going to get customer feedback. And if customer feedback is, hey, we actually like to use this instead of Revit, then it's like, okay, it's on, right? It's time to build out a whole slew of BIM tools. Or more practically, we're just going to go call Ian and say, hey, Ian, how do we work together so that you can handle the BIM side of building design? Yeah. And that's the future ecosystem, right? Is creating these bridges between these different companies with the API and, architects, developers, general contractors, people like John, like y'all all are participating in that broader ecosystem. And just because someone's like not open sourcing their software, they're very hard, written, like TestFit not open sourcing it, because let me tell you, getting to where we have gotten right now has been one hell of a journey. And
probably more than the open sourcing is the fact the API is probably more important.
Like I want to get to a point, right? I want to get to a point where we can sell TestFit as an API and have it stable, have it be a cornerstone. Like look at Mapbox; it's like a cornerstone of the GIS environment. Like, what if there's an API out there that you can reliably get parking structures out of pretty quickly? That's where my head's at, is where we're headed, right?
Like, would your advice to innovators out there be, there's lots of small niche problems that need tackling, so we need more innovators. We need more people to step up, to stop thinking about the idea and do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, go for it.
How do you go
failure,
about it?
Failure, like it's only going to end in one of 2 ways: failure or success, right? So you have a 50% shot. Let's go.
And if you fail, you probably learn something.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to chip in there with that advice that you gave me all those years ago, Clifton. Find a customer, or find a problem that a customer has, or find a problem that someone has and solve it. I mean, that's the key to it, right?
Well, it's solving it with this manic sort of look in your eye, like I never want you to ever have to do parking salt. Like if you're not religiously anti the problem that you're solving, like I just don't think you'll be successful in the startup world, right? Like you have to be somewhat passionate about solving this problem. And there's some startup founders that are driven by money and they want to make a lot of money. Ryan and I are not that. We would have picked a different if you want to make a lot of money, pick a different industry, right? But I'm driven by when people use my product and they say, holy crap, I never have to count parking stalls again. Like that's my joy, right? And so that's the currency that you live by is those little stories. And don't just sit around in a firm. You have an idea, don't just sit there. Like go build it. Go find people that you can build it with. Don't fall into the well of, I have to learn Dynamo in order to be successful at my job. Like that's a lie. If you have an idea, there are software developers out there that you can work with to solve problems. Like TestFit would not have been built if I didn't have a software engineer as a co-founder. So there is lots of things you can do just by bringing your ideas to the table. Just showing up is a huge part of success, right? And unfortunately, I've failed to show up a few times, but moving forward, just showing up is most of what success is.
And I suppose that, picking up on that, that's what we're trying to do with the AEC Hive, is build this community, from around the world, because what we've seen is people doing fantastic things in different parts of the world, but it's almost like little pockets, you know, and nobody knows about it. As you said, bring the ideas to the table. Like, we want to be the table where people can bring their ideas and connect with other people that might help them with that idea. You know, and that would be the idea of the community, that you making these sort of connections, because nobody's going to develop something by themselves. You always need help. You know, you needed your co-founder who had expertise that you didn't have to realize this dream of never having to count parking stalls again. Ironically, you've probably seen more parking stalls in the last few years than you probably ever would.
Man. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. You get customer feedback. You know, so I was drawing a 30-acre site with 17,000 parking stalls, and TestFit started getting a little clunky, and you're like, well, have you thought of not drawing that many parking stalls? But it's always great. It's always great when you get feedback like that, because the software didn't crash. It just ran into a performance limitation, which means, oh my gosh, we could just have to look at performance, you know, work a little bit on that, and then we can now support, you know, even more massive sites and stuff. So,
and they probably forgot that it took them 2 weeks to draw it previously. And now they have to wait an extra 10 minutes. We're running up to the hour now. John, any further things you want to ask? Or?
No, nothing now. I think I've got my fix of generative design for one day. So I wish Clifton all the best in building out TestFit, and I look forward to seeing future success and more problems in the AEC ecosystem being solved by your great solutions. So good luck with that, and thanks for sharing your insights with the AEC Hive community.
Yeah, thank you all for inviting me. I'm looking forward to working on a post. I'm going to post some original content, if you will, to the Hive. So cool. Look out for that in the coming weeks.
Awesome.
That's excellent. Looking forward to that. Yeah, it's the platform is quite new, but it's starting to get some traction, and we're really excited about it. Just sharing what great people like TestFit and others are doing around the world to a broader audience. It's really interesting. And I think what I got out of today was just this idea. It seems to be a recurring theme on a number of podcasts of almost breaking up the functions and tools into little apps, interconnected, as one of our speakers called it, the Internet of Construction.
Yeah,
which is a fantastic idea, that we get away from these monolithic programs. People use only about 5% of its features, but pay for 100% of the features that they don't use. So yeah, and
the future is really, I think, how do we wire these different APIs together to get the result that we want, more than it is how do we click these specific buttons in this software, to get where we need to go. So maybe I'll end on that. It's this interconnect ecosystem. It's super weird. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be very disruptive. Architects are not going to like it, but hey, we're headed that direction.
I think architects will like it, because it'll take away a lot of the mundane and tedious tasks, which look, to be honest, who enjoys that anyway?
Humans have an innate fear of the unknown, right? So I'm really just saying, because it's going to be new and an unknown, there's going to be just feedback. There's going to be resistance to it, and that's our challenge, I think, as innovators, is to convince the industry, hey, this is a better direction. Maybe we'll end on that.
Yeah, very good. So look, from my side, Clifton, thanks very much. I really appreciate your time to share what you guys are doing. I think it's fantastic. Keep doing it, and we'll hopefully keep talking to you. I look forward to your post on the AC Hive, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Cheers.